quite that before. And it's just an example, I think, of how Donald Trump has created this violent, toxic political environment. And, I'm even afraid for the safety of my family, to be honest with you.
Wow, guys, we have two more events that are coming up before the election. Progressive Victory is organizing an event that I will be at for at least one day in Las Vegas that's happening on October 26th and October 27th. And then if you can't make that one and you'd prefer to go canvass over in Pennsylvania, there is an event on the 2nd and 3rd. The Democratic National Convention, the DNC, somebody for the Democrats is organizing that one. I won't be at that one, but other DGGers might sign up. If you're interested, check out the link in the description below or go to progress.win to sign up for either of those events. Can I ask real quick, how long do we have for this? 30 minutes, 60 minutes, what?
30 to 45 minutes.
Okay. Just so I have it in the back of my head. One thing that said, so I'm 35. And obviously, I'm in the mindset of this is the most important election ever. We're more divided than ever. But people say that like every election cycle, right?
Right.
Music is more degenerate today than it ever has been. And they've said this since for all time.
Yes.
It does feel like things are different though, right? But I mean, we've always said that. Do you feel like things are more divisive now or more vitriolic now than they were in the past? And if so, what are a few things that you would contribute that to? Or do you think it's always been this bad?
I do think things are more polarized, more divisive, and more toxic than in the 42 years since I predicted Ronald Reagan's reelection in April 1982, when 60% of Americans thought he was too old to run again, and his approval ratings were historically low. And by the way, although I've been accused of partisanship on both sides, my predictions are totally nonpartisan. They have nothing to do with my political views. I've predicted the two most conservative presidents of our time, Reagan and Trump, and predicted liberals like Obama. If I predicted according to my political views, I'd be useless. I wouldn't have correctly called the last 10 elections. But I do feel something different. I've experienced a lot more hate this time than I ever had in my 42 years as a forecaster. And I have never before seen a political candidate who basically says, if I win, my term will be dedicated to taking revenge against my political opponents, which could be anyone that he decides he doesn't like and wants to go after. He said he's going to be a dictator on day one. I've never heard that before. No, he said it's going to be to drill, drill, drill. But drilling doesn't take place overnight. It takes months and years. And no dictator in the history of the country who's been a dictator on day one has ever voluntarily given up power. He said, you're not going to have to vote again, my dear Christians, if you vote for me this time. Well, under the protection of the Supreme Court's immunity decision, he could declare martial law, confiscate the ballots, essentially establish authoritarian rule over the United States. And he seems to love authoritarians, even giving desperately needed COVID tests to the murderous thug Putin when they were in such shortage in the U.S. and could have cost lives. He's reprised the worst elements of our past, talking about bad genes, which is reminiscent of the horrific eugenics movement of the early 20th century that resulted in the sterilization of thousands of people, horrible restrictive immigration laws. He's called his enemies vermin, reminiscent of the worst and most murderous dictators. So yes, I do see something new and frightening. And as I said, I've never been fought before, and I'm 77, been frightened for the safety of myself and my family. I am now.
Why do you think things are like this? How do you think the conservative movement got so, I don't want to say bad, but there's a type of populist anti-establishment rhetoric that I think is pervasive among the right now, that feels like it goes a little bit harder, a little bit deeper than it has in the past, right? Whereas conservatives maybe historically have been like, oh, I don't know how I feel about schools. They wouldn't have said, I don't trust every part of the government. You wouldn't see the conservative movement in the past saying things like, I don't even trust the FBI. I don't trust any of the intelligence. I don't trust the military. I don't trust big corporations. I don't trust any of these things. Why do you think it's gotten so bad specifically on the right?
Well, I think it's in part Donald Trump, a uniquely toxic, egomaniacal political figure. But I think you're not quite correctly representing the conservative movement, because Donald Trump, while an anomaly in terms of his personality, is not an anomaly in terms of the history of the conservative movement. What was the big grassroots conservative movement of the 1920s that elected senators, governors, congressmen, members of state legislatures? The Ku Klux Klan, which was virulently and bitterly anti-Black, anti-Catholic, anti-Jewish. Have we forgotten Joseph McCarthy, in a sense, kind of a Trump before Trump, who went after homosexuals, alleged radicals, ruined people's lives? Have we forgotten that to date, the most intrusive government program was not instituted by liberals, it was instituted by conservatives, the prohibition movement? It killed an industry. It destroyed the laws of nearly half the states. It tripled the law enforcement budget of the federal government. It spawned organized crime. And we're seeing that now being reprised in the attempt to deport, every immigrant. That would be even more intrusive than prohibition. Immigrants don't live in separate communities with big signs saying undocumented immigrants live here. They're integrated into the entire population. They're married to citizens. They're married to legal residents. Their kids are citizens. Their kids are legal residents. You would literally have to demand the papers and proof of many tens of millions of persons if you wanted to deport undocumented immigrants. And of course, if you wanted to establish a fetal life law, you would then have the federal government intruding in the reproductive lives of women across the country. So I think, Trump is a uniquely toxic personality, but I don't think it's just Trump. I think that's a big mistake. If Trump blitted out tomorrow, I don't think there'd be that much change in the modern Republican conservative movement.
What do you think is the future of the conservative movement after Trump? Well, actually, wait, let me ask one quick question, because I said this completely incorrectly before. In 2020, when Trump lost, or didn't lose, I guess, depending on who you ask, but for the rest of us, when Trump lost in 2020, I figured he wouldn't run again. You can't lose an election and then rerun against the same guy that you lost to 4 years later. He's already there's just no way. And he did. If Trump loses this election, do you think he'll run again in 2028, or do you think he'll kind of step aside? Will the Republican Party tolerate it? Will the constituents be too supportive of him for him to leave? What do you think will happen?
Well, the Republican Party is so sycophantic, is so united behind Trump. I think, sure, they would nominate him again. But, he's going to be 82 years old. He's not in the greatest of health. I'd be really surprised if he was vigorous and sharp enough to run 4 years from now. I have a lot of problem with the mainstream media. I go back to the old saying reiterated by many philosophers. It's not just the evil people who wreak havoc on our world. It's the good people who don't do enough to stop them. And the media has been very much complicit with Donald Trump. They've given him immense coverage because he creates ratings. Every day during his trial, Trump goes out, speaks uncontested, lies, attacks the judge, attacks the judge's family, attacks the justice system, and says the same thing. And yet the media reports it every single day. Plus, they are far too much treating this election as though it were a normal election of policy clashes. It's not a normal election of policy clashes. Policy is irrelevant to Donald Trump. He couldn't care one whit about policy. He cares about imprinting his stamp on the government, which means enriching himself, destroying his political opponents, snuffing out the free press, very much. And he's been explicit about this. It's not like you have to discern it. Who's his big buddy who he's embraced? Viktor Orban of Hungary. And what has Viktor Orban done? Destroyed the political opposition and destroyed the free press. The press spent 2 weeks, headlines every single day, blasting Biden for so-called, mental decline, perhaps legitimate. Why aren't they spending every single day blasting Donald Trump for his obvious decline? He rants incoherently for his lives and for his clear and present danger to the survival of our democracy and the freedom and safety of every American. I'm always reminded of the statement during Nazi Germany of Pastor Niemöller, where he said, first they